Peace and love, what's happening? This is Stacy Patrice here for another edition of Soul Healing Satsang. Happy Sunday. Welcome to the space. Welcome to the vibe. Welcome to the room. Woohoo. Loving the people coming in. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. So today is the final of the 4 Sundays we've spent in October during the Soul Healing Satsang every Sunday, speaking about shadows and mirrors and how these affect our lives, how they show up, and lots of juicy detail throughout those. So we kind of started the first week of October, just as a recap, with shadows and mirrors, what that means, what that looks like, how those two ideas or elements exist in the world, and like what is our responsibility and engagement with them. And then we kind of moved on to talk more about beliefs. And we spent that second Sunday talking about beliefs and belief systems and redefining beliefs and what is the lie in our beliefs, or is there a lie in our beliefs? And then we moved into talking about the mystery of self and courting the unseen, which was last Sunday. And we got a little deep, and it was a wonderful, juicy, yummy session. If you haven't checked it out, check out the Rebuild Archive IGTV. It's available there. But we talked a bit about like what that means to like get to know the part of ourselves that's not always leading, not always in front, and how we are able to like really think on a much deeper level about what it is that we are interested in. And then we are here today. And so today we are talking about using the force. And I want to talk about this in a very practical way that helps people to understand and really get what's at stake when the information and the inner work that we're doing starts to be reflected in the world. So starts to be mirrored in the world. We get a special message about that information. So that's what today is about. Today is about using the force. And I want today to be a very engaging satsang. I would love to just speak with you all about your thoughts, about your ideas, lots more engagement in the comments today. And then definitely we're going to vision and we're going to write. And those are like two of my favorite things to do when I'm coming up with new ideas. And so I just want to share what some of that looks like in today's satsang. So again, thank you so much for joining us. October has been quite a doozy, but quite wonderful in the ways in which we talk about inner work and how we can work our inner work. And so what we're looking at as we move forward to November is a whole different vibe. Not only does every month have a vibe, but the state of our world right now is definitely going to deliver us a different vibe in November. And, you know, we're closing out a calendar year, so to speak, if we're talking about the Gregorian calendar here in North America, but we're closing out a calendar year, but we're not necessarily utilizing all of the events that we've previously encountered throughout this year in order to close it out. And what I mean by that is, usually in a typical year, and we have not had a typical year, let's just be clear, right? But in a typical year, there's a series of events. It's kind of a way that the seasons go, and they're kind of like markers and things that we have that remind us like, oh, it's autumn, it's winter, it's spring, it's summer. You know, there's a cadence, I would say, in how everything moves that usually gets us to the end of the year and what we're going to tell ourselves about the year upcoming. And so when I started to think about that, I was like, man, we really don't have the same level of indicators. If we're not paying attention to the internal indicators, which I know all of you here are, then that is not going to give us the kind of information that we need in order to move into the year close and to know what's next. So we have to tune on a different level this year. That's all I'm really saying. And our tuning on a different level puts us squarely and firmly in the spot where we have to pay attention to how we've grown over the year, how we've grown season to season, month to month, week to week. We have to also look at what are the things that were thrown at us, what are the things that came our way specifically and directly, and how do we direct our energy after experiencing those things. So I'm going to start with the question for the comments. If you can, drop in the comments, what are the things that you feel challenged you most to deal with this year? So I'm not talking about things as it relates to individual items, but if you could clump it into a category, what was the biggest challenge you've had thus far? And not just in this month, but in this year, what's the biggest challenge you've had thus far? So that looks like For instance, I would say my biggest challenge was just trying to remain in my own core center, trying to make sure that what it is that I need to do has been what it is that I've been doing, as opposed to putting myself inside of what is actually happening and the thoughts and the collective feelings that people have been sharing and spreading, and making sure that I always remain tuned with what it is that I wanted to see for myself during this time, so that I could continue to be of service, so that I could continue to be of service to myself and others, and then also provide a different narrative if people are confused about how narrow the field is right now. So what are some of those things for you? You can drop that in the comments. And while we're commenting on that, one of the things I wanted to connect from this conversation, and why this particular question, this particular conversation is important today, is when we come back and meet again, it will be November. And it'll be next Sunday, but it will be November. And there is another set of things that we will have to think about when it's November. So in any creation, category, ceremony, you want to bring what is happening to a close, so that those thoughts and those feelings and those ideas become like a capsule that help you to move forward into the next thing. So it might be too much to talk about what any of us will be doing in 5 years. We can imagine, we can dream, and we will on today's satsang. But it's also really critically important to say, what is it that I have gathered thus far? What is it that I have gotten and understood thus far? And those things that I've gotten and understood become the material or the medium through which we will create. So that is why it's important to identify that. So drop that in the comment. What is it that you've gotten thus far? Like those things that you were really challenged with this year. And some of them might be things that you've already accounted for, and some of them might be things you're still working with. So this is not a completion kind of statement about your progress, not a progress report. Just what is it that you've been very challenged by? And drop that in the comments. And as you do, I'll move on to talk about what these upcoming events are going to ask of us, not in a fortune telling kind of way, but in the flow of the way that things are going. How can we be ready? How can we be readied? What are we supposed to do with what's ahead, even before we see it appearing, right? So the question about what is it that you've gotten, what is it that you've been challenged with, is now connecting to how do we use the force? And this is the important question. How do we use the force? So using the force, and we can talk about this topic. Actually, I'll start by saying, when I say use the force, what does that bring up for you? Because that will help me encapsulate what I'm saying. So what does that bring up for you when somebody says use the force? Whether it's a specific technical origin reference, or whether it's how you understand it when people use it in everyday talk, what does it mean to use the force? What does that mean to you? Not textbook definition that you find online. What does it mean to you? Okay. And as you all are answering that, I think I see one comment that just says family. Family has been a challenge. Yeah. Probably, I'm guessing that comment is about trying to stay connected with family, trying to stay in a place where family is balanced or harmonious. Yeah, so I understand that. But using the force, what does that mean? What does that look like? How does that show up? That's the question for today in the chat. And so the importance of this particular satsang with that title is that I think we are in the time where it's time to use the force. I think in all other contexts, I would not use the word force for anything I'm talking about. I don't think force is always the answer in a general sense. I don't think we get to really get justice and feel fulfilled when we force things to happen. But when we use the force, that becomes a different action. It becomes a different power, and it comes from a different place. It's a different kind of intention. So I'll start by saying, because I don't see any comments yet, so I'll start by saying, when we think about how we're existing, and this is very important, I'll bring it all together for you. When we think about how we're existing, we've been talking about shadows and mirrors. We've been talking about how something that we are or something that bothers us shows up in somebody else. It reflects it back to us. That's our mirror. We've also talked about how the things that we don't really spend a lot of time looking at come up at the most inopportune times. So how important it really is to pay attention to these things as they're existing in our inner landscape, so that when they happen in the exterior, we're not totally taken aback. We're not totally thrown off. We're really in a space of already being centered and grounded, so that when things happen in this other way, we're not necessarily responding to it in a way where it's fresh, unexpected, or we're in shock about it, right? We're constantly using the idea that we are in this world together. We are all here together, and that there is something, there is an answer. There's a balance, that there is a thing that's happening in the world, and then there's a thing that's happening with us. And then how do we connect with the thing that we can't see, that we know needs to happen because of what we do see happening in the world, right? So that interconnection, that interconnection between those areas, it's what we can see, that's visible, that exists, that we're conscious of. What we can't see, that's maybe we're conscious of, but that's invisible or non-tangible in a form where everyone can see it and understand it. And then we talk about what exists within us that can be conscious, unconscious, visible, and invisible. And for the invisible or the unseen, as we've been talking about, how do we start to bring that forward? How do we start to utilize that? And what force, what is it that we're connecting with that allows it to take shape? And so I'll read a couple of the comments here because I love when you all comment. Rising above is the first answer I see. Yes, rising above is how we use the force, or how we understand what using the force is. Using the force is following my flow, synchronicity versus resistances. Absolutely, right? Grand day, grand rising. To use the force for me is to move and stay in the flow of activities that I create to center myself. Yeah. So it's kind of like a flow is probably the best word, but also, like a track, I like to say a trance of sorts. Awareness. Yep. I'm challenged by getting started and staying consistent. Okay, so those are both answers. So so look at the things that you've been challenged by this year. So that's the first step. Thank you all for corresponding. Look at the things you've been challenged by this year. Look at the things that really had you kind of up in arms, like, I don't even know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, how. And you might be very far away from some of those things. Some of those things you had to problem solve and create very quickly. Some of those things were starting to take a different shape, and they might have swept you up with it and carried you somewhere. And you're like, I don't even know how I got here. I just know that I am here and I have something to do here. And some of those things might be things that you're still kind of resisting or battling with, right? Because they just haven't gotten a nice fit or a nice gel with you yet, right? So all of these things that are happening, all of these challenges that have happened, give us an opportunity to really look at how it is that we are moving forward in using the force, right? So when something happens in your life, or when you start to understand things a bit differently, because circumstances have changed, people have changed, when those things start to happen, what we do with that information, how we process that information becomes important to what we create after, right? So for my artists in the building, if you think about this as any other process art, you start with what you have available. And you may come up with a solution that I need more materials, I need more things available, I need more time, I need more skills, understanding, knowledge, theory, application, in order to create the thing that you are already aware of has to come from this process, right? So this is what I mean by using the force. This is kind of how I'm saying where we are right now. We can see what's not going well in our own lives, in the world at large, and we're not responsible for saving the world, nor could we ever, but we might, as Dave Chappelle likes to say, be able to make a nice little corner of it, So if we think about it that way, what is the pocket that we want to create? What is the art that we're creating? How are we going to get from this kind of creative consciousness where we see what's wrong to actually, and when I say wrong, I mean see what doesn't align with us, right? What doesn't work for people like us, right? Whatever group that is. How do we then take that material and move it into a place where we can play with it, work with it, understand its properties, understand its elements, and then kind of move to a new space, which is, this is what I'm creating on the other side of what I understood, what I explored, what I studied, right? And so if I think about it in that way, it's very easy to get that there are things that are showing up for us every day, confronting us multiple times, multiple days, and that we have to get to the point where we say, what am I going to do about it? Is it enough going on for me to care about? Do I care about it enough? How do I get to the place where what I'm seeing has enough meaning that I'm able to create from it what I like to see? How can I make that connection across categories? Because obviously the thing that hurts and doesn't feel good and isn't aligned, we don't want to keep playing with that. We don't want to keep living in that. We don't want to keep subjecting new generations to that. We don't want to be entangled with that, right? So then when we get into this middle space, it becomes the responsibility of you, of me, of us, to start to see what we can play with. And what we can play with usually has very specific coding for who we are. Very specific coding of who we are. In other words, we might come up with 50 things we would love to have changed. And we might discover out of those 50, there are 30 people, 30 of those things people are working on diligently. And you can find them if you look for them. And maybe of those other 20 or so things, they're not really strong answers for. The question is, how do you narrow down what you can provide a strong answer for? Because it does not have to be you providing strong answers to all of it. Just where can you place your focus? So I want to check what your comments have been. I've been seeing the feed moving, and I want to just see what it is that you all have to say. All right, good, good, good. It says here, I was challenged most by my grief and all the shedding of people and things that I needed to let go of. This has been a heavy elimination year. Can we just say that? Can we just admit that? This has been a heavy year for elimination. I think of elimination as a spiritual principle. My girl Erykah Badu says, evolving requires elimination. And we think about that. We have to kind of sort out, weed out those things that keep begging of our time, of our energy, of our resource, of our vitality, that just don't work. We plain know that it doesn't work. We don't need extra evidence or encouragement to see if it works or doesn't. We're very clear that it doesn't work, and yet it's still hanging around beyond its expiration date. So it's about clearing some of that stuff. And yes, sometimes those are people, circumstances, things we've been very attached with, and we have to practice loving non-attachment in order to move on from those things. And when we start to move on from those things, we start to find out really and truly what using the force is about. And that is what we're going to go into just a little bit deeper in a moment. I understand that I must create a couple of end dates for goals I have. Yeah, goals in 2020 can go on forever. So if we had things we wanted to do this year, we can always wait for the right environment. We can always wait for things to be better. Let's see if things will open back up. Let's see if, these people will be available to do this. Let's see if we can meet in person. We can just stretch things all the way out this year. And as we start to think about it, it's like, well, what are the things that we're not going to stretch out any longer? What are the things that are actually already complete? And we're just looking for other people to sign on or jump onto it. And there have been a lot of beautiful projects that have been created this year, just out of people having the sheer will to say, I want to create something. That's what I can control. I can't control everything that's going on and how, but I can create something that will allow me to be the master of it, that will allow me to be the final word on how it looks. And this is what we're talking about today, is how you use the force, what that looks like when you decide to put it out there, not just your own individual inner landscape, inner space, but what happens when you actually try that out there, when you actually take that out there. And so using the force becomes not only an intention, but a motto. So here's how it's going to look for today. All right. So using the force is what and how I'm describing it here today. I did not come up with this term. Obviously, I know all of my Star Wars people are like, look, this is what it is. But here is how I understand it and how I see it. It's using your force, right? It's using your force without force, okay? So using your force without force looks like you being a creative, in tune, spiritually aware, inclined person that understands that everything has a flow even when it's not flowing your way. That everything has a reason and a silver lining even when it feels like it's raining on you really hard. That everything is in harmonious balance even if we're not aware of how it got there or how to keep it there. We start to realize that we can take our hands off of things and they still move and they still grow and expand. So for the purpose of this conversation, using your force is about how do you tap in and stay in, and I call it trance, but how do you tap in and stay in with the things that you are bringing forth so that the outer elements don't really get a chance to touch and condition them before they are released, right? And so I'm using lots of metaphors and entendres here, so jump in where you can. But it's the idea of we want something in its purest form to come from us, and we want to be able to give it to people and deliver it to people in its purest essence, right? How many ingredients and outer opinions or how many cooks we have in the kitchen does change the plate. It does change how we experience the meal. Who we're eating with does change how we experience the meal, how we digest the meal, right? So what we're looking at is this belief in yourself, this belief in your inner power that you know, even without knowing on paper, that you know and you will know how to move through these challenges, how to move through what it is that you want to see happen. So this idea that, yes, there's always things happening, and then it's just you, just little old you sitting here, right? But little old you becomes big you when you use the force, when you decide to connect to the things that can help you shape what it is you want to see, what it is you want to give. And it is the discernment of what those ingredients are that give you a better indication of whether this is part of the intention that you set. Right? So we have all this divine wisdom. We have these downloads, these purposes, these feelings, right? And sometimes we don't know what to do with all of that because we try and personify everything like, well, let me show my feelings to this person. Let me show my feelings to these people. Let me express. And it's like sometimes those feelings just exist, and they exist for your information. It's not always for other people's information. What you're fed up about is for you. It's not necessarily to make people around you, force people around you to change. The balance is they're there because you need to see it. And you seeing it means that you're going to bring balance to the situation and what you can do about it. So this is always kind of the exchange that happens. It's never just simply those people get on my nerves. These people are messed up. I can't stand these kind of humans. Look, that's all data. That's all information for you. If you want to be in the rhythm of your true divine nature, you're not paying attention to other people who are not in the rhythm of theirs. You're not basing your existence on the rhythmless nation, right? If you're in your rhythm, you don't pay attention to people who don't have rhythm. They'll throw you off, right? So you're always constantly trying to find how to stay in your rhythm. And that's the force that I'm talking about. It's a very strange thing because you can't really quantify it. But when you're in it, you know, it's like something's lifting you and carrying you to where you belong. It's like something's got your back. And yes, we have all kinds of names for what the force is and how it shows up. It doesn't necessarily mean that the force is something so finite and specific that when we're talking about it, we're all talking about the same thing. No, we're not. So let's think of the force as this unlimited supply of support that already exists. It can be lying dormant, stagnant to you because you're not utilizing it. It doesn't mean it's not there and it's not making moves. It means those who choose to tune into it and align with it are those who have the benefit of it, right? And so even if I say I wanted to do something evil, there's a force for that as well. You know, there's not necessarily just me looking to do evil if that's what I chose to do. There are lots of people looking to gather around that idea for whatever reasons, right? And so there are resources, there are networks for whatever it is that you want to do. So if you want to use the force, and I'm speaking in a positive way, if you want to create something that addresses the deficit that you experience that triggers you, if you want to create the sacred space, and I mean this in a universal way as well as in individual circles, if you want to create something that addresses that, you don't have to pay attention to what caused it in order to complete it. Does that make sense? That was just the trigger. That was just the moment of, look, this is on my nerves. I had to do something about it. Or this is not okay for me anymore. I've grown out of that space. I have to do something different, right? Doesn't always involve frustration. As you start to figure out what is that different that you need to do, you have to get some momentum and energy around that. It's not just going to change because you just had an idea. The momentum and energy is what is going to help carry out the idea. And so in order to carry out that idea, what is the momentum and energy that's needed? What are the things that you've been practicing in your inner cultivation that all of a sudden are speaking to you and saying, hey, you know what? You know how to do that. You have already done this. You've done this a million times in this particular format. Now we need it in this particular format. So how will you bring that forth so that it can be experienced for this particular thing? And I'm using a lot of vague this and that because I want to make sure that everyone who hears this now and or later is able to see themselves in what I'm saying instead of me leading in what I'm saying, right? So work with me in that respect and start filling in these blanks. So I start with a question. Once we cultivate what's needed, how does that show up in our process? So we have these thoughts and ideas, right? These thoughts and ideas, whether they're self-created, given to us. I guess I would say there's a conditioning probably before the thoughts and ideas on the timeline. There's a conditioning. So there's the universe as it is in its nature. There's a conditioning that lies on the next line for most of us. Then there's our thoughts and ideas that come from there. And then from those thoughts and ideas, there's the feeling that we have about those thoughts and ideas, the feelings that carry us through those thoughts and ideas that attach a lot of times to those thoughts and ideas. Then there is that rewire moment of like, okay, this is not for me. How do I do this differently? That's the question that comes up. How do I avoid having to deal with this? And so the key is not avoidance, it's through instead of around. But through means you get through the idea that it can trigger you, that it can change your energy, that it can rule you, that it can hold you captive, right? So that's the rewire moment. It's like, what do I do differently that allows me to understand? Maybe I understand what is happening. Maybe I don't yet. But if I understand that I can rewire to do it differently, what is my process of that? Because I can't really ask any questions about that. I can use someone else's process, ritual, experience, understanding. But if we're talking about soul, and that's what I'm always talking about, if we're talking about soul, how do we create and cultivate a process that's specific for what it is we're doing? We almost have to seek it. We almost have to ask for it. We have to draw it closer to us. It's not just something that exists out there and we hope it lands with us. It's like, no, how do I get closer to this thing? How do I get more intimate with this thing? Because I am looking to change it. I wouldn't assume that you would just pick up a canvas and grab some oils and assume to create a masterpiece if you have no relationship with these tools. I would say that it's possible, because possibly in that process you decide to use the force and you end up with something amazing. But more likely than not, on most days of the week, you probably will have to develop an ongoing relationship with it in order to churn the kind of results that you have up here. And so once we're in that process of rewiring and doing things differently, then how do we give that change attention in the world, right? So that's what we're talking about, that force. So that conditioning that exists, that possibly has created the thoughts and ideas, that has evoked feeling within us, that has given us an aha of the rewire. Whether we follow it or not is an important step, but the aha of the rewire. And then once we get that moment of, I'm going to say that moment of lightning insight, how do we go through a process to become more intimate with it so that we can put it out there? So one of the things, and this is so key in all that we're talking about today, one of the things that I always look for is my universal understanding of who I am, right? I know that I could relate to absolutely anybody on this planet. I don't care what their demographics are. I don't care who they vote for. It's not that kind of party when I'm coming from the core, right? So if I can come from the core, I can say to myself, I know there is a human thread that exists between me and every other person. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to like it or that it's always going to be ease and flow when I'm in company with those people. But I do know for sure that there is a commonality, right? How intimate I want to get with this person to find the commonality, that's on me, right? How much time and energy I want to spend to invest in this commonality, that's on me. And they might have a different level of investment, but that's really on me for my life, right? So look at things that you create in the same way. Certain things I'm like, I really wish this could be done with, but I don't want to invest the kind of intimacy with that. I'm not interested. And it's not going to go well for me because I'm not interested in that process. It doesn't speak to me personally, right? I want to see the final evidence of it. And what I trust as a human is that there are other people who are going to be moved to experience it more intimately. And I, like others, will benefit from their expression and exploration of that. Does that make sense? Like, we constantly think about us having to have our hands on things to change it. It doesn't always have to happen that way. We should be more reserved with our hands, like that this is sacred work. And when we put our hands on something, we mean it. And so that energy and that power is stronger. And it doesn't matter what you put your hands on, but it's more meaningful because you're not wasting energy just randomly doing stuff because it would be cool to do. What is the intention? What is the meaning? What is the purpose behind it? Whether that's you creating art in the world, which is fabulous and wonderful. As an artist myself, I couldn't live without it. Or whether that is creating community, whether that is creating for causes, whether that is creating casual, everyday life needs and resources. All of this is important, and we need all of us in order to have that landscape be so rich and fulfilling. And we need people who have ideas churning to release them from the prison that is their brain and actually create with them. So this is the step where I talk about how do we rewire to doing it differently. What do you have that is just something you know how to do? That is something that is easy for you. That is something that maybe you have a long experience with. And when you utilize it in a working sense, it has a certain title. But when you utilize it in a spiritual sense, it has a certain intention. What is that? What is that? Drop that in the comments if you got it. It's sometimes something that we need a lot of. And I think we spend too much time focusing on ignorant or genius. It's not about ignorant or genius when it comes to anything other than those tests, right? It's about the levels to which we perform, produce, and create, and that we are fully utilizing the things we do have. It's not about focusing on, I could be smarter, or they are smarter, I'll wait for someone smarter to do it. It's about waiting for the realization that you are the one to do that thing that really speaks to you and doesn't really speak to other people in the same way, especially if you have no evidence that other people are feeling this in the same way. Then you know it's you, right? You know it's something you have to do. So what is that? What are those unique things that you have that maybe you know what to put it to, maybe you don't. But what are those unique things that you have? You can drop this in the comments, inspire your people. Put it down there. And then also, if you all want to answer another question, this is one I wrote earlier today that just feels good. Is like, what do you encounter when you know you're being spoken to step up or step forward and create something that doesn't exist? What do you encounter? So in other words, can you put what the signs are? What are the symbols that happen? What are the experiences on the journey that occur when you know it's your turn? And I don't mean this, y'all, in any kind of like super mystical way. Take it that way if that's where you are. I feel like we all have these experiences, and sometimes we condemn them because we don't have other people to talk to about them who experience them. Well, here you do. So if in fact you know when you're being called for something, I'm not talking about other people saying it, but like when you know you're being called for something, what are the things that typically happen that let you know you're being called out by the universe? What are those things, that show up? I know in my life, I meet people who reiterate the same question. And it aggravates the heck out of me because it's the same question. It's like that, consistency is not a thing to most people. And so that drive for consistency is like, maybe people don't understand what's actually happening, that nothing is robotic and consistent when it comes to art, that nothing is, the same all the time. And that people wanting something to be reproduced or wanting something to somehow be done again. Like people say all the time, ooh, can you save this? Or, ooh, can you give us your playlist? Yeah, have you all seen this on the lives where people just start asking people to do extra work? It's like, you're not present. They're giving it to you right now. It's happening now. Life is happening right now. To try and recap it kills a bit of the magic. Get it now. You're in the room now. Get it now. Don't wait till later. Don't put this off. Don't be like, I'm gonna come back to this in a few days. You probably not. Just pay attention to it now, as it's happening now, because as it's happening now, it is calling you now. Trusting that you're always in the right place is what's happening now. It's not doubting that, oh, well, because it interrupted this, it must not be the right time. You made it in the room on that interruption. It's the right time. Whatever was happening doesn't have the same, I'm going to say the same flow with you as what's happening where you are right now. And we have to understand that that is the opportunity. This is a microcosm of what we experience on the macro level. It's constantly the postponement, the changing of force. I trust that if somebody sends me an invitation, I feel drawn to it. I'm always going to check with that gut. And I feel drawn to it and I jump in there. I know magic is happening because I didn't know about it. Someone sent it to me who knows me. And I went in and I know magic is happening. And then if I don't feel that in that space, then I go with the flow where I do feel it. No apologies necessary. No, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm going to check it out later. You ain't got to do all that. This is for the people it's for. And so is your work. So is what you want to contribute. So is what you have to offer and share. Money structure or not money structure. Free and available to all or privately secluded to a chosen few. It doesn't matter. It's only for the people who it's for. There's no such thing as creating something for everyone. There's no such thing as having something that everyone will resonate with. Even if you choose a product or create something that everyone needs, like hangers or, things that happen in your home, whatever, people will still have different ideas around what that should look like. I don't want a plastic hanger. I want a wire hanger. Somebody need to make one out of plastic. I don't like plastic hangers. I want one out of wood. You know what's really nice is I have silk hangers. Like, there will always be more because as humans, we are evolving. But what is supposed to happen is align yourself with what works for you. Don't go scattering around because the trend changes. If everybody's on silk hangers and you love plastic hangers, rock with your plastic hangers. Don't go chasing all that other stuff that everybody's doing because it's not necessarily conscious and it's not necessarily in rhythm with your spirit and your nature. Trust that you choose what you need, even if it goes south, that you needed to experience that for yourself, that you needed to be in tune with that so that you could be in a different space, and never question that. And that's how you stay on the path of using the force. Let the force be all that exists and what attaches to you when you decide to dream big, when you decide to be alive. What is that energy that kind of, keeps you buoyant? What is that energy that says, okay, we're going somewhere, we're moving? What is that energy? And you don't always have to name it. Maybe you do, but you always know that, as people say all the time, they're like, I don't even know how I got here. I'm not even sure, people get that, what do they call that? That, the effect, imposter syndrome, right? People get imposter syndrome because they say they want to do something and they got there real fast, like, and they don't even understand how they got there. They're like, I'm so humble. And that's a real feeling because you're like, I have no idea. I had an intention and I'm meeting that, but I had no idea how to do this on my own. And then as soon as I decided to dare into it, people started picking up and doing it with me and carrying me there and flowing, and things are not going wrong. And the way that I saw the world is dissipating. It is becoming another place. That's what we need from everybody right now. We need that reality that the world is a different place that we have not yet experienced, and we're allowing the experience that is being shown to us and given to us to take up too much space, where we forget that there are other spaces that exist. And so we start to adjust to the space that is presented because we think that's what it is, but we don't really look deep enough into those pockets that we have not been paying attention to. And again, this is where shadow work and mirror work is important, because there are so many other spaces, but we tend to stay stuck in the common space. And maybe we're afraid to be uncommon. We're afraid to be the outlier, the weird one, the different one, the one that gets dragged on social media. Look, if that's your world, there's a whole bunch of people that won't drag you because they were scared of being dragged and now you're their hero. So it becomes, this kind of reckoning with space. Right? And so to me, using the force is about that. It's about lining up with what lines up. It's about not fighting what lines up. It's about not resisting what lines up. It's about trusting what lines up. It's about being a back floater. For my swimming inclined, it's about being a back floater. That this terrible, crazy, wild, dangerous water can be gentle enough to allow you to float on your back and trust that you won't go under. Because there is a different side to water than what you've been told and presented. But if you never experience it, you'll just say the same thing everyone else says. So it's back floating through life. Does this mean that there aren't challenges? Absolutely not. It means there are challenges, but it means that when the terrain gets to a point, or when the waves, when the crest and the ebb and the flow of the waves gets to a point we can't backflow anymore, you pick a different technique. Maybe now you have to swim like this. Maybe now you have to go underwater. Whatever, you pick a different technique. It's not about using the same tool for all challenges. We have to switch up in our toolkit. A hammer can't do it for every job, right? So I'm gonna go back. You all have been talking, because I've been talking, and I'm gonna go back and see what these comments are talking about, because I really want to make sure that this is captured. Yes. Intention, writing, teach, building community and creating experiences for other people. That is a beautiful intention. If you know you're good at that, then some part of your life should be dedicated to that, right? Some part of your life should mirror that. And I don't like to use the word should, but the possibility for a part of your life to mirror that is what's at stake and what's key. I get nervous when I know it's my turn. I know, right? When you're being called out and you get the spotlight or you get the opportunity, and sometimes it's not a in front of people opportunity, it's a behind the scenes, can you pull it together opportunity, and you're like, yikes, it gets a little strange, because you're like, why do I have all the nerves about it? And I learned when I was doing runway modeling, one of my favorite, actually the icon of the industry to me, Naomi Campbell, said something that really helped me when I was very early into it. She said she gets nervous still every time before she walks the catwalk. Now, we've all seen Naomi's walk. It don't look nothing nervous going on up in there. She need not be nervous. She is amazing and fabulous, and still is, which is a whole other story. But it's like the idea that you can do something so well, you can be in your zone with it, you can be in trance with it, you can be using the force, and you can still be nervous. You can still feel that bit of anxiety and nervousness that says, I'm not really sure if this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And you just trust it and go with it, right? So when nervousness is a really, really good sign. People think nervousness is about doing something wrong. If you think about all the times you've been nervous, it's usually because the truth is emerging in a space where it doesn't feel safe, right? It's because the truth of who you are has come to the front, and you're nervous about how people are going to receive it. That's usually where nervousness comes from, is when you're in truth, not when you're in the lie of your life. All right. When I hear a big echo of my thoughts, yeah, and it starts echoing in other places, maybe your dreams, maybe, it starts echoing in random conversations from people over there, and you just happen to be in the coffee shop at the same time, and you hear it, and you turn around to see who's saying it. And all of a sudden, it's like you're having a conversation with them through a conversation you had with yourself. Absolutely. People I thought I was rid of return to my life. Yeah. So that's always interesting too. When people show back up, there's a lot of different things that can create that. But when people show back up in your life, a lot of times it's the frequency you're on. And sometimes that can be an indication like, oh, I done dipped because I don't. And then other times it's like, well, I know this person, maybe in the way we were dealing or the way we were experiencing life was not it, but this is actually what is more realistic about our connection, our expectations. So that's always beautiful too. I get more peace in expressing it, but I get worried that I cannot fulfill what is ahead of me. Yeah, that imposter syndrome is something else. Yes, the whole point of the live is to be here live. when people had concerts, people started saying things like, can you record it? Do you think you can pull up your camera? And it's like, what do we have against being live as things are live? It's the element of surprise most people don't like. And for a lot of people, it's the element of the unknown. It's like, I'd rather see it and know what happened through someone else's account who decided to brave it, rather than go there myself and find out. And that's just wild to me. Opportunities come out of nowhere, challenge me again to expand. Yeah, absolutely. When you get a gut feeling, for me, one that feels so exciting is almost frightening with a mix of impatience, kind of like when you're about to jump off a high dive. Absolutely. Like, yeah, it's that same nervousness, that same excitement, that anxiety that we don't know what's going to happen. But whenever I get that I don't know what's going to happen feeling, I go back to the mantra I shared with you all a few weeks ago, and I say, I know who I am. And knowing who I am is really the only information I need, because knowing who I am means that I can employ whatever superpowers I carry at the moment that something's happening. I can't plan these conversations with you all. I cannot, say this is what I'll say and that's what it is. I have to actually show up with you all in real time and be receptive to what's being said about what I'm saying. So it's not necessarily, you can't plan all of life. You can have a rough outline, you can be ready, but you can't plan it. And so, yes, that anxiety comes up once you realize, like, oh, okay, it's my turn. You know, this is the time for me to speak up, speak out, move forward. Go where the magic is happening. Absolutely. Yes. I love these comments. Yes, see space as it is instead of letting the space mold you into who you are. Absolutely, because that is important. And then the last comment I see is nervousness comes as truth. Oh, it's my comment. Nervousness comes as truth, emerges in a space where we don't know if it's safe or it will be received. Absolutely. So knowing that is half the battle. So here's what we're going to do now before we close out today. And this was my idea about today, is not just to have this conversation about using the force, but have some experiential understanding around it. So in the next 15 minutes, I want two things to happen. If you can hang in there, I want us to take a moment to vision and a moment to write, and then we'll close out, okay? And the reason why is because I have something to share. So we'll start with the visioning piece. I am going to ask, if wherever you're sitting, or if you want to change where you're sitting, you want to rest on your back, whatever feels good to you. Because I can't see you, you have free reign. I am going to be reading from some prompts that I wrote right before and sharing those and any other things that come up around this vision that we can carry. And collective visioning is so powerful because we're all doing it at the same time, which means this starts to already spark a force that maybe other people won't see, but those of us connected will understand. So let's start with taking a couple of deep breaths. Take it in through your nose. Exhale like you're pushing everything away. Do that a few times. Inhaling through the nose. Exhale, push it away. And as you do this, maybe 2 more times, allow whatever chatter, whatever preconceived notions you have to just be exhaled out. Let's clear the space for something new to happen. That's what we're here for. All right. So as this is happening, go ahead and close your eyes if they're not already, if you prefer, or keep them dimly open. All right. Almost closed, but dimly open if you prefer. All right. So the question I have to take you on this quest is, first, who are you? This is this question coming back again. Who are you as you understand yourself right now? Who are you? And instead of trying to answer the question, treat this as a meditation where the answers float to the surface. Who are you? Because who you are is where you're coming from. So who are you is the question. And allow this question to marinate with you so that the essence and the qualities start to come to the surface versus just the roles and responsibilities. The essence and the qualities start to come forth. Who are you? And then from here, start to think about how that shows up in the world. So the who are you that you've identified, how does that show up in the world? That essence, where do you have evidence of it? Start conjuring all the visions that are connected to your essence in the world right now. How do you see that essence taking shape, becoming tangible, taking root? Maybe how do other energies or people respond or correspond with that essence? And then as you're looking through this vision, start thinking about the times when that essence feels more contracted. What's happening when that essence doesn't have the space to stretch all the way out? What's actually going on in life when you get that feeling? What are the kinds of things that are happening when you experience that? That essence wants to stretch out and then it bumps up against something. What does it bump up against? And again, don't answer, allow the visions, the thoughts to come forward. What is it bumping up against? Who resists that essence? And then from there, slowly start to move into what we see that we feel is misaligned in our culture. And I use culture broadly. You could say our social world, our community landscape, however you want to understand that as the things that exist in the uniqueness of who you and others like you are. What are those things that you feel are misaligned? And when I say misaligned, meaning with your understanding, what are those things that feel misaligned? Like it's just something about this doesn't gel, doesn't feel good, doesn't make sense, isn't right. What are those things? Who do they impact at their worst? What are those indicators that we're not getting it right yet? And then what are the things that we're seeing that speaks directly to our feeling? Like as the observer, what are the connections between what we feel is true and what we like to see and what we're actually seeing? Maybe there's a great distance, but you as the observer sees what connections between what you're thinking about, what thoughts you carry, and maybe the representation of what the other thoughts are. What are you seeing that gives you clues and connections? And then finally, in the bigger part of the vision, how do we repair? How do we repair? How do we address? And when I say we, I mean you. How do you address? Ask yourself, how do you address for that misalignment? How do you address that? You leave it be, you walk past it and turn your head? Or what is the way you prefer to address it? Maybe what is the way you would like to address it? Do you have an idea of how to address it? All right. Give yourself another minute or so with that thought. And when you're ready, come out slowly, slowly flutter the eyes open, grab a pen and a scrap of paper, notebook, journal, whatever you have near you. If you have to type on your device, as long as it doesn't cut off our connection, go for it. Because we're almost done, but not quite. Write down any impressions you've got. If you saw yourself in a new way, if you were spoken to about the misalignments, about your essence, write those down. Any connections, take a moment and write those. Those are your special messages. If you didn't get any messages, spend more time with that question or those questions. Write them down for you to consider again and take them into a meditation of sorts later. But give yourself the opportunity to capture what you saw. We'll take like one more minute with that. All right. So we are in the rewiring process. And now it's about consciously writing what change can be spawned from this attention. So I'm just gonna ask you a couple of questions. You can write about them now if something comes right away, or you can answer them after this live ends in the next 6 minutes. But the idea is to kind of get the essence of the question. So the first question I have is, what is our part? What is your part in the breakdown? What is your part in the breakdown? So in the thing that you see that you feel is misaligned, what's your part in that? Do you feel you have a part in that? Are you complicit in some way with that? Are you buying into that? Have you started removing yourself and eliminating things that continue to be in concert with that? Start talking about what is your part in the breakdown. Maybe you are the thing that you're complaining about. Maybe your belief system is around the thing you're complaining about. Whatever it is, be real honest with yourself. This is not for the chat. This is for your own personal paper. What is your part in the breakdown? And then ask yourself, what are you up against? Or you could say we if you're talking about a group, if you're speaking to the culture and people like you who are affected, what are we up against? It's important to identify what you're up against, meaning there's a reason it hasn't changed thus far. And some of those reasons are imagined, and some of them are physical things that have happened, events, occurrences, phenomena. So talk to yourself about what you feel you are up against or what your culture or community is up against. And just speak to that on your paper a bit, because there's a lot of information in that question that can really help you to walk towards the next two questions. What are you up against? Or what are we up against? Okay, and the next question is probably the most direct of all the questions. What things will you change? Not how. What things will you change? You don't have to know how you'll get there yet. You don't have to know who are your team of support that will have your back while you get there. Just what things will you change? And asking that question can go from micro to macro. There might be internal things you have to change. You have to spend more time doing certain things. You have to change your environment. Or this might be about directly your mission in the world. Here are the things I am about to change. Notice the I am. I am about to change, or I am changing. Whatever that is for you, what things will you change? Write that down. If it feels more empowering, the things I am changing are, and write your answer after that. And that's a more prominent step in the direction you are dedicated to. Again, whether you answer this question now, later, or start now and expand on it later, up to you. It's your world. And lastly, what are the fears you will have to confront to create this change? What are the fears you will have to confront? Identify them, call them out. Don't leave them in the shadow. Call them fears out. Because sometimes calling them out gives you the opportunity to see it's not really that deep. Sometimes it's hard because it feels deep because we're not with the force yet. So they seem huge and insurmountable. But writing down what the fears are that you will have to confront for this change is the way that you start shaping what it is you're about to do and how successful you can be in it. And knowing something about the unknown that you think you'll be up against. This paper is not asking you to do anything right now other than to start to identify. That's the important part. This is not about some big crusade you're going to go on in the next, 2 minutes, or maybe it is, but it's up to you. And so I'll give you all one more thing to this that I think is important to close with. And if you're still writing, that's fine. This force that I speak of is about the untapped potential we share. If nothing else has been clear, take that, right? There are worlds that exist that have no residents. Y'all hear me? There are worlds inside of this world we live in that exist, that have zero residents. No one has taken up stock there yet. We haven't had evidence of the unimaginable yet. There are places that need our attention, our love, and our help that we've turned our head away from, or we don't even see it because we got a blind spot. That's what I'm talking about. That's what using the force is to me. It's when you engage those superpowers for dynamic results. Don't just stick to the casual. Summon the courage. Activate your creativity in your own consciousness. Seek to find the answers that help to bring closure to the things you want to cease. And you don't have to ask for permission. Your birthright sets you up for this perfectly, divinely, and it's about utilizing that. That's it, that's all. I hope you all play with this. I hope you all start thinking about this, make space to continue thinking about this, make it one of your, rituals of the season. I hope this takes you through the upcoming week and the upcoming weeks. You can break down anything that bothers you in this way. Anything that you seek to change, you can take this process to it. I believe this video will be available on the Rebuild Foundation IGTV, at least for some time, if you need to review it or if you didn't catch it from jump. I thank you all for being here, for sticking in. I know there's some courageous souls on this call, whether I can see you or not. I feel your energy. Thank you so much for being a part. And no matter what other people are doing, carve out space to find your center, because that is the signal, antenna, vibration indicator of how the force will attach to you so that it can move. All right, can we do that? All right, thank y'all so much. Again, I am Soul Yogini SP here on Instagram. Stacey Patrice everywhere else. My website is staceypatrice.com. I am here every Sunday on the Rebuild Foundation channel, giving you that mental yoga through our soul healing satsangs. I thank you for your participation. Blessings and blessings to each of you as you carry on into the days ahead, and remind yourself not only that you know who you are, but that you can always look at what's going on in a more creative way and start to become a resident of the world that you want to see. Peace, y'all. Talk soon.